Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those of you for whom it's morning, and good evening for those for whom the day is winding down. I see that we have Manila, we have Lisbon, we have New York, people from all over the globe watching. Welcome to all of you joining us from LinkedIn, YouTube, La Vanguardia. Remember that this session will be available on demand on our LinkedIn page as soon as it's over. We welcome your comments, reflections. There are always lots of questions. Please, not too many comments. I'm sure I'll get some about my rather retro 1970s headphones, but we're more interested in the questions. I'm Greg Burke. I'm the Director of Communications at IESE. Our guest today is Jordi Canals. If you studied here at IESE, you probably knew him as Dean here or as Professor of Strategic Management. He holds the chair in IESE in Corporate Governance, and he's president of the Center for Corporate Governance here at IESE. If you are joining for the first time, this is part of a series the alumni department is putting online. It's open access. It's one way that IESE is trying to help in the midst of this crisis, putting our expertise at the service of society. As you know, the session today is on the role of a board of directors in the crisis. With that, welcome, Jordi Canals.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you all for attending this session. I do hope that you are well. I also wish that those of you who have close relatives, close friends who have been infected, I wish a very quick and very effective recovery for all of them. And please do stay well, stay safe. And we have to do a lot of work, so we need to stay safe. So very, very glad to be here with you to talk about some challenges for boards of directors in this time of crisis.
Great. Thanks, Jordi. You know, one of the overused words here is unprecedented, talking about the crisis, but I'm going to use it again because it is effective. Just to show how deep it is, how does this kind of crisis change the role of a board of directors?
Well, the board of directors needs to take into account something which is very important, that it has to help companies in any context, in good times, bad times. This is not a very good time from a business viewpoint, from a social viewpoint, but the board needs to help companies to develop for the long term. In different jurisdictions around the world, different countries and different models of regulating companies and boards of directors, one can observe that boards actually have some basic functions. They have the function of appointing the chief executive officer, removing the chief executive officer. They also have the function of approving the financial accounts of the company every year. They also approve major strategic investments that the company wants to develop and implement, and eventually takes into account all the different dimensions of compliance. But those dimensions are just what you can call the basic stuff, okay, basic legal duties. But in most jurisdictions, in North America, in the United States and Canada, in most European countries, in many Asian countries, also different parts of the world, there is one duty that boards of directors always have. And this is what, technically speaking, we call it the duty of care. So boards of directors need to care about the development of the company. And it is in this time of crisis, the survival of the company, and eventually how they can help the company emerge stronger from this crisis. So this means assessing, strengths and weaknesses of the company at this time, and not only in terms of financial indicators, in terms of cash, this is very important, but there are other things. For instance, how well positioned the company is in terms of serving customers, taking into account that circumstances have changed. Customers, for instance, do not go and do shopping. They do it online. They don't go to stores. They don't go to restaurants. They cannot move a lot. Also, how the global supply chain with procurement and logistics moving around the world, how this has changed and been disrupted by the pandemic. There is also a very important dimension here, which is we have our colleagues, our employees working online. But this is a new way of working, and we need to make sure that not just from an organizational viewpoint, this is an effective way of doing so, but also from a psychological and emotional dimension, whether our colleagues, our employees are well. So lots of dimensions that are not only, I would say, under somehow the monitoring of the top management team. Boards of directors should be concerned about all those dimensions. They have the final responsibility, and actually shareholders have appointed them to think about the long-term development of the company.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the word survival, because that's where I wanted to go. I think a board is normally dealing with strategy, long-term strategy, at least in the good times. But in these times, as you said yourself, it really is a question of survival for many companies. How can a board help here? Does a board have the quick reflexes that are necessary?
Well, first of all, I think the board can actually help the CEO and the senior management team in many ways. And in a time of crisis, when there is very low, almost no visibility about midterm, long-term scenarios, having a committed and professional board of directors helps a lot. Those people that can actually contribute with different perspectives. They bring different professional experiences. So it's a diversity of views, which is always very, very important. There is a second dimension, which is also, I would say, relevant for boards of directors today, which is how they try to help the CEO and the top management team think about, I would say, really bad worst case scenarios. Okay, we do not know how long this crisis is going to be, how deep the crisis is going to be in some industries. So we really need to make sure that without knowing too many things, in other words, with too many unknowns, the board should help the CEO ask, what if demand falls below this level? What if the level of revenues, falls down by 30, 40, 50%? What should we do if we want to make the company, I would say, sustainable, if we want to help the company survive? We need to have those questions. And sometimes the senior management team needs to be focused on execution, making sure that the company goes on the right pathway. So you need this supervisory function that the board of directors is trying to carry out.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, I remind you to send in your questions and Professor Jordi Canals as we talk about the role of board of directors in the crisis. You talked about the stress test, asking the worst, the what if questions, worst case scenarios. If a company's in a nosedive, the engine has died, the company's in a nosedive, no board is really going to be able to save that company.
Well, this is a very good question, Greg. I think first thing we need to observe is that not all companies are nosediving. Okay, we may see some companies today in some industries, airlines, for instance, companies that manage airport infrastructures or train infrastructures, hotels that actually are having a tough time. But most of the economy still somehow working. We need to have, we eat food, we drink, we need some basic stuff, we need energy, we need electricity, we need water. We still, and there are lots of industries still working, perhaps at a lower level of activity. And here, in this case, I think it's very clear the board can actually, really help and work with the senior management team to think about the best ways to go through the crisis, not just from a financial viewpoint, which is very clear, more important from a strategic viewpoint, and also on the way we do it. So how we deal with people, how we actually treat our employees, how we actually approach customer service under this, I would say, very stressful context. So lots of questions that the board can actually put on the table and help the CEO and the top management team reflect upon and develop some very good action plans.
Okay, we have a question from the public here, from Anthony Mascre. With increasing pressure during extreme times, how can a board help avoid conflict or how can it use it? How can boards have a consistent approach but still use the benefits of different viewpoints? These tend to get exacerbated in times of high pressure.
Okay, well, avoiding conflict is a very nice goal, but I wouldn't say it's the final goal. Sometimes you need to have different points of view in a board, in any team, just to make sure that the final solution has developed, has emerged, because there were divergent views about the same problem initially. So I would say conflict is not a bad thing. I think what is very important is that the board and board members, led by the chairperson of the board, actually develop a style of work by which you respect every board member, you respect every opinion, you allow other people to express their views. More important, there is a very important role that the chairperson of the board has to develop right now, which is to set the agenda for the board in this time of crisis. The agenda, the legal responsibilities and the functional responsibilities are the same, but the agenda actually changes, and the chairperson needs to change the agenda. And in the way he or she changes the agenda and leads the discussions and allows for a very good collaborative atmosphere at the board level, those boards of directors that have those positive qualities will be in a condition to help the company and to help the senior management team much deeper and much better. And the other point, which is very important, is that in this time of crisis, having, I would say, a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. Why are we here? What do this company try to do? What specific functions the company, the employees, the board of management actually expect from the board? All those basic questions are always important. But when you have a crisis like the current crisis, they are even more important.
But you need the sense of purpose before the crisis arrives, right? You can't go looking for it now.
No, you're right. I think that companies that do not have a sense of purpose have, I would say, an additional challenge in this time of crisis.
Okay. You say it's not time for a completely new strategy, but it's time to adjust. It could, however, be time for big changes. How important is it that the board works closely with the CEO? And how often is it the case that the board has got a close relationship with the CEO?
Well, there is a tradition in corporate finance and corporate law that emphasizes that the role of the board is to monitor the CEO. And this is true. It's a legal function that the board actually has. But this function should be subordinated to, I would say, a higher goal, a higher function, which is that the board, together with the CEO and the senior management team, need to help develop the company for the long term. And this is actually the true goal of good corporate governance and good boards of directors. So you need the collaboration between the board and the CEO. I sometimes highlight that the first mission, the first, I would say, task of the board of directors is to support the CEO, the senior management team. I really like members of boards of directors telling the CEO, what can I do for you? What can I do? I mean, to help you, to help your colleagues, to help the company become successful in the long term. But let's not forget that sometimes we think about boards of directors in terms of reputation, in terms of influence, in terms of power. But really, serving in a board of directors is essentially about service. And service means that you need to be in close touch, in close collaboration with the people you want to serve. And specifically, regarding strategy, the board does not have all the information. The CEO and the senior managers actually have a much richer information about the industry, about customers, about the company. So strategy, initially, is the task and the responsibility of the senior management team. But the CEO with the senior management team need to discuss and reflect with the board of directors hypotheses, assumptions, perspectives, forecasts, and see whether that makes sense. And obviously, the board should feel comfortable with the reflection and the plans that the CEO and the senior management team actually bring to the board. So you see, it's back and forth. It's not just one body that has the final responsibility. And this is the nice thing about governance, that you involve, I would say, very sophisticated skills in strategy, in finance, in marketing, etc., but also the soft skills of working with people, helping people and influencing people by giving them good professional example is really important.
Okay. How does the board help the CEO in organizing the management team at a time of crisis?
Well, this is, I think, a very relevant question, because you have many challenges. You are the CEO, you're a member of the senior management team, and you already have, your plate full. Challenges, problems, and on top of this, now you have the crisis. I do think that the board should just make sure that the CEO organizes her team, I would say, in a rational way. So you need to have perhaps some special teams of people, of managers and other employees working on some specific topics, let's say safety, for instance, global operations, supply chain, procurements, how you deal with disruptions in all those dimensions, finance, cash, etc. But then you need people who still think about customers, how you serve your customers well. You still need to think about how you run your operations, if you have a manufacturing facilities, how, in terms of safety, that operation works very effectively. So you really need to have somehow the day-to-day normal operations going reasonably well or going very well. And then you need to face the new dimensions of this crisis. So a very good decision that the CEO can take at this point in time is to really make sure that you have the right teams, that those teams do not interfere with one another, they share information. And the CEO should be always this role, but especially this time of crisis, the CEO should be the conductor of this orchestra, okay? And should be aware of the contribution of each member of the team, especially the management team, and actually allows each management team member to participate, to make a contribution, and especially that this contribution is synchronized with other people's contribution.
Okay, we have an interesting question from the public here, comment/question. Jean-Louis Moreau says, coronavirus is really just a rehearsal for the greater crisis to come, which is climate change. He says, will the board learn the lesson?
Well, this is, I think, a very interesting question. I do not know how related both phenomena are. Climate change with this, with coronavirus. There are still hypotheses, and we should allow scientists to develop on those hypotheses deeper. But the question is very important because I think it touches a point relevant for this discussion, which is that, for a few weeks, the board of directors should focus on how the company actually survives and goes through the crisis. But a crisis should not be, I would say, an excuse not to think mid and long term. And mid and long term, climate change is important, it's very relevant, as it is very relevant to care about your employees, how you actually engage your employees deeper and better, and the reaction that employees will have when the economy actually picks up again and there is again demand and you have new job opportunities, and the level of loyalty that employees will develop towards your company will depend very much on how well you treat them during this crisis. So your point on climate change is very good, but also there are other somehow mid-long-term dimensions that in the current crisis can somehow be left aside by boards of directors because they are busy with the survival issues. But I agree with the person who actually asked this question. We should not forget about climate change because this is something that is here and is here to stay, and companies should be part of the solution.
Okay, let's ask a couple questions about finance because a couple have arrived as well. Almost every company right now is financially strapped. How does a board help the CEO, help the CFO in this area of finance, besides, in addition to introducing them to some friendly banker?
Okay, let me give you an example. You have a company, and in this company, the CEO and the CFO and the senior management team develop some scenarios with cash forecast, how liquidity is going to be for this company at the end of the year, depending on different scenarios. And the CEO has two options. First option is go to the board of directors and check with the board of directors the hypotheses, the assumptions, the different scenarios that you are thinking about. And if the board is a competent board, the board will help the CEO, the CFO, perhaps fine-tune and improve even the scenarios that the management team has developed. So this is scenario number one. But you have scenario number two. And scenario number two is when the CFO thinks that he or she knows everybody and goes to banks and checks with banks. Look, we're going to have this problem, by September, by December 2020. So please do help me with a new credit line. Well, probably if you think about how prudent both approaches are, you can see the value of the contribution that the board of directors can make, not because they are financially, I would say, more competent than the CFO, but simply they can ask some questions that eventually a banker, senior members of a financial institution, capital markets may ask you. So I do think it's very prudent that even if it's not the first, I would say, area of competence of the board of directors to make sure about your short-term financial plans, it's very prudent that the CFO, the CEO go to the board first. And second, and this is very important, many strategic decisions that have to go to the board will depend very much on your cash levels. So it's very important to keep the board informed about how you see the short term, the midterm, what type of scenarios you observe there. And as I said before, the board of directors with a diversity of members can actually make very good contributions based upon their own experience to the senior management team.
Okay, we have another question about finance coming in from the public, from James Dress. Listed companies. He says, realistically speaking, in public companies, how much does the share price influence the advice or the decisions of a board of directors in times like this?
Okay, this is a very, very difficult question to answer. I think it depends very much on every company, every board of directors, and certainly in a time of crisis, people will have a tendency to look at share prices. But we should also be rational here. And share prices today do not reflect anything except that there is a lot of uncertainty. This is the only thing that share prices actually reflect. The analyst who says, look, I do have all the information and my best share price estimate is this one, we should, probably tick this analyst out because he or she doesn't know much more than the average analyst, all the perspectives that come from different players in the market. So the share price is not the only indicator of success of any company, and certainly in times of crisis, they just reflect some, I would say, gloomy expectations that investors have about the evolution of the economy and the evolution of the stock change. So my advice is, look, you should be responsible, should have a look at share price, you should know it, and you should speak with major institutional investors who could give you their feedback. But a good board of directors has to manage for the long term. The long term involves the share price in the midterm, the long term, but also many other dimensions. Many of them will be captured by the share price, some of them will not. And even those that are not captured by the share price, some of them may be very relevant.
Okay. For those of you just joining us now, I'm here with Jordi Canals. He's professor of strategic management at IESE. We're talking about the role of boards in this time of crisis. Many of those watching Jordi have seen your PDF on this subject. And in it, you say that the boards have to help companies actually improve their reputation in a time of crisis, that all the decisions have to be not only professional, but also ethical. This gets us into corporate social responsibility, purpose, which you touched on before. Can you get into this a little more deeply?
Well, I do think that we live in an economy that even when you have a virus like the one that is actually afflicting so many people around the world, it's an economy more and more based on intangibles, on the quality of your people, your human capital, on your reputation, your ideas. I think this is very clear. And reputation is difficult to build. You actually develop it in small steps, many times, with a lot of, I would say, problems and a lot of difficulties. And it's very easy to actually destroy your reputation. And a crisis is a time where companies actually can help build their reputation or destroy and kill their reputation. And you do it, I would say, in 2 or 3 very basic areas. The first area is how you deal with your customers, how you actually share things with your customers. Are you taking this crisis as an opportunity to abuse your customers in terms of pricing, in terms of decreasing the quality of your products, decreasing diversity? So how you actually think about putting customers first? In any organization, customers should come first. A company exists, as Peter Drucker said many years ago, to serve customers. Okay, if we don't have customers, we don't have a company. Second dimension, very important in terms of reputation, how we treat, how we deal with our own colleagues, with our employees, with our people, how we deal with them, how we actually take care of them, about their safety, about this emotional stress they go through. Most of them cannot go to work, they work from home. Some of us are very lucky and have good technology, but most people do not have good technology at home, so they have to work perhaps in not very good working conditions. So how we treat them. Some companies will need some flexibility, will need perhaps to adjust the number of hours that professionals actually spend with the company. Some companies will need to go through some restructuring. There will be some layoffs. So how we deal with people who have to go through those circumstances. So you build a reputation. And it's not only how you deal with the people who suffer from any of those policies or measures, people who have to be laid off, but also people who actually stay with the company, because they will read how the board, how the senior management team deals with people. And the third point, very important as well, and we all have our own memories of the 2008 financial crisis. We know that some companies got out of that financial crisis and could survive, but some of them didn't do it with, I would say, a very high reputation. Some of them, were considered by consumers that somehow they charge higher prices. So we have long memories, and this is very important. It's the board of directors, the senior management team have to make a very clear commitment. Look, we're going to stay truthful. We're going to communicate the truth. We're going to deal with people in a respectful way. We're going to consider the dignity of every person, every employee, every customer as the first priority. I think that companies that do this and communicate this well are going to emerge stronger from this crisis.
Okay, you're really saying it's a make it or break it moment for the companies and their reputation. Question coming in from Patrick Ryan. He says, how can boards do a better job in this people-first approach?
Well, it's also a very good question. First, because boards of directors, broadly speaking, do not have a great expertise in dealing with people's affair, with human capital in general, except for succession plans for the CEO. Okay, so boards of directors do not have a great, I would say, track record. Jurisdictions do not put as a legal duty of boards to take care of employees, of human capital beyond succession for for the current CEO and firing the CEO whenever this is considered necessary. So it's a very good question at any time, but I think it's a very important question right now, because if you think about those issues of survival of the company, you think about the reputation of the company, and let me introduce a new dimension, which is we really need to count on I would say, every single person in the organization to come up with creative ideas. Sometimes when you need to think about how you're going to somehow redefine your strategy or fine-tune your strategy or improve ways to serve your customers, you really need to have the views of the people who are actually dealing with customers or people who are actually working in specific operations. So we really need to make sure that there is a bottom-up movement of ideas, suggestions, proposals. Strategy is not just the exercise of the senior management team with the board of directors. It should involve many people. I would say strategy in times of crisis, and especially strategy for survival, really involves people who are in the trench, who are working with customers, working with operations, working with suppliers, because those people bring to the board of directors the right information that the board actually needs to make the final decision.
Okay, well, there's a question, very much comment/question, very much related to that point. Carlos Gonzalez here says, boards of directors are not diverse. Will we see after this crisis a push from shareholders to make new director appointments so that all perspectives are heard and companies can better navigate tough times?
Well, this is also a very good question. I think diversity has many perspectives and many dimensions. It's true that in different parts of the world, different countries, the level of diversity of boards of directors may not be that high. In, for instance, Scandinavian countries that seem to be the paradigm of diversity in boards of directors have done quite well, but in other parts of the world, it's not the case. I'm also convinced that the board of directors will need to change in terms of diversity, and probably the pressure coming from investors, coming from shareholders, and actually coming from the case of family businesses going through this crisis will change depending upon how boards actually react and behave during the crisis. In a time of unexpected uncertainty, the value of diversity is even higher. So more diverse boards probably have more a richer portfolio of solutions to share with the senior management team to tackle the challenge of this crisis.
Okay, we're getting all sorts of questions here, Jordi, so I'm getting nervous about getting off subject. Let me ask a couple more things about, you talked about the importance of employee engagement, now more than ever, if you will. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that I said before that that companies in a contemporary organization are based upon people. People are, people bring ideas, people bring creativity, people deal with customers. In software-based industries, it's the technical capability of people developing new code. So it's very clear that companies depend less and less on physical capital, less and less on financial capital. By the way, except when you have liquidity problems, as it happens, financial capital is still very important. But you see in the long term, you see a trend in many companies around the world towards intangible assets. And in intangible assets, employees' engagement, employees' commitment is more important than ever. And in this crisis, we actually plunge into the crisis in, I would say, unexpected way, because we didn't see the pandemic coming so aggressively. So we were just invaded by the pandemic. We're all here, we're all in the same ship. We need to count on everybody. So more than ever means that we're going to get out of the crisis as an organization if we're able we're able to count on every single person to come up with her best capabilities, ideas, suggestions, efforts to get out of the crisis.
Okay. I want to, my area is communications. I want to ask you a couple quick questions on communications. What's the role of the board here? Communications in a time of crisis.
Well, usually, as you know, Greg, communications is not the specific job of the board of directors. So essentially, it has to do with the CEO, the top management team. Many times, the chief communications officer is a member of the senior management team. But I think in this time of crisis, the board of directors has an important role, because communications have also somehow been disrupted. You have fake news, you have online media, you have all types of connectivity among different stakeholders. So you need to make sure that the messages that all the stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, your banks, capital markets, shareholders, the investors community, they all get the same message. And it should be a message which should be authentic, should be truthful, and I would say should be human. Okay, the 3 dimensions: authentic, truthful, and human. So it's very important that the board actually make sure that at least the essential lines of this message is the same, is consistent. Then the senior management team and the chief communication officer will develop those topics depending upon the specific audience. But this is very important. What doesn't make sense at all is to have a message for your employees, another message for your customers, another message for capital markets, another message for banks. So this is crazy. Yeah. We need to have, authentic companies, and authentic companies have one message that is shared and is communicated in a very consistent way.
With all the stakeholders. What about communications between the board and the top management? I assume in a time of crisis like this, you can't just have a Zoom meeting once a month. That's not going to do it.
Well, I think that to understand communications between the board and the CEO and the senior management team, you need to go back to those 2 initial principles that I mentioned. The first principle is that the board of directors need to think about the long-term development of the company. And second, and very important, that sitting in a board is not just sitting in a board, is serving the company, serving the whole company, and serving in a very specific way, and helping the senior management team. So if in normal circumstances, the interaction between board members and the senior management team should be, according to each company and the guidelines that each company has, should be constant, should be very frequent. In a time of crisis, this communication should be really almost daily. Doesn't mean that daily you have board members speaking with the senior management team, but you need to have the board, the chairperson of the board speaking every day with the CEO, perhaps with other members of the senior management team. So you really have a flow of communication which is constant. You have so many news, you have so many decisions that the senior management team has to take and has to implement. You also have feedback about how those decisions are being implemented. So the flow of communications is always important, and in this time of crisis is actually indispensable.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions coming in. Christopher Bunzel asks, any recommendations for what any board should not be missing? Is there any sine qua non, something a board should not be missing?
I think that we have already spoken about a number of things here. Those of you who want to have, I would say, a very exhaustive, comprehensive diagnostic of what the board is doing and how it can improve, can have a look at this brief paper that I prepared. That is, I think, has been sent to you. It's a PDF. It's a brief document. But if I may, an idea that can help, I think, board members is that the board is the final body of decision making in a company that will be responsible whether the company is successful or the company fails. And since we want to avoid any company from failure, we really need to work with, I would say, very important, a sense of ownership. Not because we have shares of that company, not because we have we own some physical assets on that company, from that company, but because we really feel that our duty is to serve the company in the best professional, in the best human way. If I may put an analogy here, it's the same thing as a medical doctor today fighting against the virus in any hospital, in any intensive critical unit in any hospital, trying to save that patient. Boards of directors have to commit. And I would say if board directors have this idea in mind, you probably won't forget about any relevant dimension about your company.
Okay. Interesting question here from Santiago Miralles. He says, will this crisis make boards of directors more sensitive to digital transformation, more eager for digital transformation?
Yeah, I do think that many boards were already, I would say, very serious about digital transformation. Perhaps the implementation of those ideas and plans is not easy. It's a complex issue. I do think that with virtual remote work based upon technology being more widespread, boards will really need to think deep about how we make this virtual remote work more functional, more effective. And if I may, I think a trend that I may be wrong, but a trend that, in this context of very low visibility is that we're going to increase the flexibility of work in companies. So we're going to switch from virtual work, remote work, to face-to-face work, I would say in a much more flexible way than before. And we're going to serve customers and deal with customers actually offline on physical outlets, physical stores, online. So the integration online, offline probably is going to be quicker and probably more effective due to this crisis that has forced us to think online and to work online probably faster and speedier than we initially expected.
Okay. There's going to be a lot of restructuring of companies going on, obviously, as they get through this crisis or don't get through this crisis. A question from Soli Sakal here. Who really takes the lead in restructuring a company? Is that the board or is that the senior management team?
Well, if you have a context where the board actually speaks on a regular basis with the CEO and the senior management team, I think out of those conversations, the need for restructuring will come up. Sometimes you will have CEOs and senior management teams who are really proactive, who have this 360 view of the company, and they know what they have to do, and they prepare different scenarios. They go to the board of directors, and they discuss those scenarios. You may have some CEOs who may be very good at execution and may not be that good at thinking 360, and need to go to the board perhaps with less elaborated scenarios. And then the board of directors should help the CEO point out, look, this plan is quite good, but you need to take into account this and this and this. You need to take into account that if you execute this, this closure of this plan, or this number of layoffs, of this decrease in product diversity, what the implications are, short-term, long-term. So you really see an interaction here. At the end of the day, the legal responsible for any restructuring is the board of directors. The board of directors has, this responsibility in most countries. You also have some exceptions. If I may point out, I think that we have some alumni and friends connecting from countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Switzerland, where you have a model of supervisory boards that are the equivalent of boards of directors in Anglo-Saxon countries or Southern Europe and many Asian countries. In this case, supervisory boards, I think I have to point out this because it's very important, have some legal responsibilities, but in Germany, for instance, the final legal responsibility for many decisions lies with the board of management, not with the supervisory board. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that there are some differences across jurisdictions. But going back to the question, I do think that you need this collaboration become very effective between the board of directors and the senior management team to think about whether a company needs a restructuring and what the pace and speed of this restructuring should actually be.
Okay. A question here from Michelle Shelkins. Does the coronavirus open the door to more of a stakeholder model rather than the shareholder model?
Well, this is, I think, a very interesting question. I don't have the answer. I do think that that boards of directors need to think long term and need to think about the long-term development of the company. Now they need also to think about the short-term survival of the company. But when you think long-term, you really need to consider all the stakeholders. You cannot think long-term if you don't think about your customers, you don't think about your employees, you don't think about the communities you are operating. And obviously, you also need to think about shareholders, and you need to think about how you create economic value in a sustainable way. So I do think that there are already a number of very good companies, not just large companies, also small and mid-sized companies that are taking into consideration this multi-stakeholder approach, which doesn't mean that they are not supportive of creating economic value. The point here is that they also want to take into consideration other dimensions, and they are able to explain to their shareholders, their investors, why they take into account those dimensions. I do think that the crisis will probably, in the short term, highlight the need to think about those different stakeholders. It's very good that most companies say, look, people's safety first, customer safety first. It's very good to hear those things, but we also need to take into account that your reputation on whether you are a company that takes seriously a respect for every single stakeholder will depend not just on big statements, but also on small decisions that this company is going to make over the next few months.
Okay. We have a question here from Edward Lau. He says, do you think boards of directors, well, let me preface it with my comment, okay, because he just asked a question. My comment would be, I think most of us tend to think of boards of directors as a lot of old white guys, okay? That's probably changing, but it certainly has been the case. His question is a little less commentary. He says, do you think boards of directors are able to keep pace with the speed of the revolution in business?
Well, this is also a very good question. I think that as it happens with management, I think it's you have to be very prudent before you make, I would say, a general statement about the quality of management or the quality of boards of directors. Because we're seeing as well in different countries how boards are changing. It's true that perhaps in some countries, the level of change, the speed of change is not enough, that perhaps you still have low diversity, that you may see companies that are very slow because the board does not help them enough. But I think, let's put this question, if I may, into a positive perspective, which is, look, a good board of directors can help a company transform, adapt, and actually be sustainable, be competitive, and make a good contribution, not just to shareholders, but to different stakeholders and society in a very positive way. So I think the question here for shareholders is, look, do we have the best board of directors that we can have to make this company the best company in our industry, or one of the best companies in our industry? I think this is the question in a positive way. And then from this benchmark, I think investors and shareholders should think, are we doing what we are supposed to do to develop the company for the long term, counting on a very good board of directors? I would frame it this way.
Great. Jordi, we're famous or infamous for punctuality at IESE, so we're going to be punctual. We're going to finish on time. Thank you very much for the session. I just want to remind everybody that it will be available on LinkedIn as soon as the live streaming is over. Be sure to join us next Monday at the usual time. That'll be 4 o'clock European Central Time here in Spain, 10 o'clock on the East Coast in the US. The session on Monday will be in Spanish. Professor Nuria Chinchilla discussing leadership with the CEO of Vertisub, Pilar Almagro, and it will be in Spanish. But for all the other sessions coming up, check out the IESE website, iese.edu. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you very much for attending this session. I wish you all the best. Take care, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you face to face very soon. Thank you.